And we will be sending out a survey following the presentation, so we will hope that you'll be able to fill that out and let us know how we did. And we're experiencing a little bit of technical difficulties right now, so we want to go ahead and get started. We had an introduction for you, but we may come back to that, we may not. But right now I want to introduce you to our first speaker, who is Nikita Luke. She's a Senior Project Associate for Health and Road Safety with World Resources Institute, Ross Center for Sustainable Cities. She's going to talk to us about creating child-friendly environments and communities. And you don't want to hear from me anymore. You are ready to hear from her. So with that, I will turn it over to Nikita.
I get started?
Whenever you're ready.
All right. Just give me one moment. All right, so thank you so much for having me at this fall planning workshop. I really appreciate it. My name is Nikita Luke, and I'm a senior associate at the World Resources Institute. WRI is basically a global research institution, and we are based all over the world and in India. And WRI helps turn cities into resilient, inclusive, low carbon spaces that are better for people and the planet. I work specifically in the areas of health and road safety, and the goal is basically to improve the quality of life, health and opportunity for everyone through sustainable urban transport and design. So today I will briefly tell you what it takes to build a child-friendly city or a community and how everyone can benefit from it. So let us start by stepping into familiar territories and understand why our young citizens need to be prioritized. Despite the fact that children use road as pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicle passengers, the road environment is rarely developed with the consideration for their needs. Some children work, play, and even live on streets, and this exposure, along with various other risk factors, makes them really vulnerable in traffic. And the result is millions of fatal or disabling injuries each year. And in most countries, road injuries are one of the top causes of death among children. And the thing is that these deaths are largely preventable. Yet, despite these alarming statistics, road safety for this particular age group is often overlooked when it comes to public health policies. Every day, around 93% of the world's children under the age of 15 breathes air that's so polluted that it puts their health and their development at serious risk. And we know that children are particularly vulnerable to the effects of air pollution since they breathe much more rapidly than adults. And this polluted air, it stunts their brain, it affects their health in more ways than we can imagine. And this is inexcusable. Every child should be able to breathe clean air so they can grow to their fullest potential. Today's 10-year-olds are the first generation anticipated to have a shorter life expectancy than their parents due to the health problems associated with physical inactivity. Between the ages of 9 and 5, the American and European children's activities levels have dropped by 50 to 75%. And in China, 92% of the children get no physical activity outside school. So we can come to a conclusion that all these factors make our streets really not the space for children to be on. Some people are more at risk than others, and when it comes to road crashes or accidents. And this user category is known as vulnerable road users. Why do we call them as vulnerable road users? In the event of a crash, people who walk or cycle who are vulnerable, they don't have any sort of a protective element around them as when compared to someone sitting in a car. Worldwide, almost 60% of the children killed in road traffic crashes are vulnerable road users, children who usually went to parks or schools and met with an accident along the way. So why are children considered vulnerable? Firstly, they act impulsively. They have their own visual limitations. They're slower when it comes to walking, and they have a shorter stature. Children and young people have the same human rights as adults, and they also have specific rights that recognize their special needs. Every child has the right to safe streets, education, play and exploration, personal safety, equity to use the streets and thrive, and of course, to be heard. So the central question is, what does a successful, sustainable, healthy city look like? And it looks like a child-friendly city. Child-friendly infrastructure that is required for children to grow and thrive has been missing from urban design and urban planning so far. And this would include your accessible green space, safe walking and cycling infrastructure, low-speed zones, car-free streets, clean air, and designing streets for children, keeping in mind their eye level and their cognitive abilities. So creating a child-friendly city would mean giving children the freedom to flourish and thrive independently, be it going to school or parks or any sort of a recreational space. It's crucial that a city has the needful available for children to move around fearlessly. I'm going to get into each of these points a bit more in detail. So the first one is accessible green space. And this is something that we all know quite well. Neighborhood green spaces can be key to enhancing both mental and physical well-being, not just for children, but also for us. And studies have shown that children who have ready access to nature and green spaces have reduced level of stress, anxiety, aggression. They have increased levels of concentration, improved academic performance, reduced risk of obesity. And we also know that green spaces can really help improve the local air quality. The second one is safe walking and cycling infrastructure. When designing streets for children, improved and independent mobility and quality public spaces should be the fundamental goal and outcome. We should ensure that the city's physical infrastructure, policies, programs, and overall priorities align with the core principles to shape streets that are safe, healthy, comfortable, and convenient for everyone. In a new survey by YouGov for the Child Health Initiative, nearly 3/4 of people polled across 11 countries supported physical changes to improve children's road safety during COVID-19. The FIA Foundation has also launched a new guidance, which you see on the screen, with the help of UNICEF to help schools, policymakers, and local governments enable healthy journeys to school during the pandemic and beyond. So how does improved walking and cycling infrastructure benefit children? Ensuring safe access for children to locations such as schools, parks, community centers, recreational areas is really important. And safe streets not only prevent road injuries and fatalities, but they also help improve the physical activity. It helps improve accessibility. It encourages independent travel. It strengthens the local community, eases traffic congestion, and also reduces carbon emissions. Moving on to low speed zones. So as you can see in the graphic here, the risk of a pedestrian fatality escalates rapidly with speeds over 30 kilometers per hour. And the fatality risk goes up by 50 to 70%. So keeping vehicle speeds low is crucial for the safety of all pedestrians, especially children. As the vehicle speed increases, the driver's field of vision narrows, And it makes it really hard for them to see, small children, run into the streets or react to sudden events. So from a driver's point of view, it reduces their capacity to stop in time, it reduces their field of vision and their control over the vehicle. So what are low speed zones? The primary goal of a low speed zone is to reduce the motor vehicle speed in any defined area. It can be a school zone, it can be your neighborhood, it can be your commercial district. And the end goal here is to improve the safety of all road users, including children. And speeds here are reduced with the help of traffic calming measures, street design changes, as well as enforcement. The target speed of a low speed zone is generally around 20 to 30, anywhere less than 30 kilometers per hour. Low speed zone designs must respond to the context in which they're being planned or implemented. What do I mean by context? We mean your surrounding land use, understanding who your core users are. Are they children? Are they cyclists? Are they motorists? What are the area regulations? What are the community values? And each specific context will require a certain combination of design measures and appropriate target speeds. There are a variety of speed calming measures that can be used to achieve your target speeds. They could be protected intersections, curb extensions, speed cushions, raised crosswalks. There are plenty of options out there. At WRI, we've worked on a low speed zone guide, which was released earlier this year. And we have an extensive list of measures and recommendations that you might find useful if you want to implement a low speed zone in your community. I'm happy to share the link after this presentation. So this is one of our projects in Bogota. So this is the Tuandelito district in Bogota, Colombia. And WRI collaborated with the government there to implement a 30 kilometer per hour zone. And this specific neighborhood is known for its high rate of traffic fatalities and injuries. And this area also has a school zone. So in December 2018, traffic calming measures were implemented with the help of cones, paints, reflective tapes, chalks, to improve the visibility of the recommendations for this particular school zone. For this particular neighborhood. So as a result of these various interventions that were implemented, driver compliance of the posted speed limit went from 29% all the way up to 86% overall, and from 36% to 97%, especially in front of the school. And when we had a survey or feedback with the community, we found that more than 90% of the adults and 86% of the minors reported feeling safer on their journey. This was an extremely successful project, and the results from this pilot project helped us garner a lot of community support, and we ended up scaling a lot more similar interventions in different parts of the neighborhood. This is another similar project in India. This was a high-risk school zone, and we implemented some speed reduction measures just to try out what works. And we will be making this permanent pretty soon. Moving on to car-free streets. Some areas may be better off closed to traffic entirely. Temporarily closing streets has proven to be a really great way to encourage more foot traffic, and it can also create really creative areas for children to play. So whether it's Rahagiri Day in India or Ciclovia in Latin America, these are names of the days where they completely close off streets to cars and they keep it open to public for that entire day. It's usually done once a week or twice a week, but it's really effective. And we've noticed that kids are usually the most excited to go out and participate. And keep in mind that car-free days don't really need to be overly organized or programmed to be super successful. They simply need to focus on encouraging more physical exercise and play. And these type of street closures can be a boon in dense neighborhoods, which have like really few open spaces or green spaces. Prioritizing children in these initiatives will help cities not only provide young people with healthy, safe outdoor spaces, but it will also convey the importance of clean, sustainable, and an equitable future. Moving on to clean air. Children, like I mentioned earlier in the introduction, children are extremely vulnerable to air pollution, and it can affect their neurological development, and it can cause premature death. Due to their shorter height, young children are exposed to 30% more black carbon from vehicle exhausts than adults. And the World Health Organization reports almost 1 in 10 deaths from air pollution are children under 5 years of age. A lot of times, outdoor pollutions from traffic emissions and idling vehicles influences the school's indoor air quality. So having clean air zones can improve air quality in and around strategic areas like schools and residential communities. Clean air zones usually discourage vehicle idling. It restricts any sort of dirty vehicles. It encourages cleaner transport modes, and it encourages greener infrastructure. For example, in UK, such policies to implement clean zones around school areas have successfully inspired actions in around 40 plus schools there. The next point is, considering the eye level and cognitive abilities of children when it comes to designing streets. Children at young ages have varied cognitive levels and skills, and the environment around them has to be planned, keeping all these different variables in mind. Why and how are children different from adults? So children have a set of serious limitations as pedestrians, both intellectually as well as physically. And they only outgrow these various factors as they age. So the first thing is visual perception. So due to their height, children have lower eye levels than adults, and it limits their ability to survey the traffic situation or any other similar scenarios. For example, a child cannot watch out for oncoming traffic if he or she is behind a parked vehicle. The children's peripheral vision angle is also significantly smaller as when compared to an adult. It's only as these children grow that they develop improved sensitivity to detect movement in their peripheral vision. Children also have lower visual resolution overall. So these are different factors that we need to keep in mind when we design streets for them. The third thing is their auditory perception. So when children are young, their ability to detect the location of sound, that is the direction, the distance, how fast a vehicle is traveling towards them, is also quite low. It's also very poor. So this is one of our projects in Mumbai, India, where we started a Safer Access to Schools initiative, and it's one of our first projects. So the Mumbai Traffic Police, along with the City Corporation, partnered with WRI to initiate trials on their first ever school zone project in Mumbai. And this Safer Access to Schools project was undertaken by the Bloomberg Philanthropies Initiative for Global Road Safety. And the aim of this this project is basically to create child-friendly and walkable school zones in Mumbai. Out of the 2,610 school campuses in Mumbai, 28% of them have witnessed more than 3 fatalities within a 500-meter walking radius between the years 2017 and 2019. So this is our methodology when it comes to project implementation. First of all, we identify which school we need to work on, and then we have a school area assessment. We then start engaging our stakeholders and the different people that are a part of this project. We then move on to data collection. Then we have your school zone design. We then move on to trial implementation, and finally monitoring and evaluation of the project to see how successful the project is. So the first one is identifying a school. So this particular street is called the Mirza Khalid Road in Mumbai. So there are two schools on this road. The first one is Christ Church School, and the second one is St. Agnes High School. Both of them are on either sides of the street. So between 2017 and 2019, this particular street recorded 23 crashes and 3 fatalities. And this also included 2 children who suffered serious injuries on their way back home and one child's death. So we started doing a school area assessment. So what we found out is that, despite the large volume of pedestrians, the street space was heavily dominated by vehicles and traffic, and it left pedestrians and cyclists really vulnerable. The lack of medians or refuge islands along the street led to pedestrians being pushed onto oncoming traffic, and it led to a lot of conflicts, and it also created a lot of accidents. Surveys showed that almost 57% of the parents had said that the streets around their schools were not safe for children, and there were several reasons to it. The top 2 reasons were the lack of quality footpaths, the lack of quality walking and cycling infrastructure, and multiple road user conflicts, which is vehicular conflicts. So we tried to study the condition of the road as well. What we found out is that pedestrians had little to no sidewalks, and whatever little sidewalk space was available was in very poor condition. So generally, the recommended width of a footpath is around 6.5 feet minimum, and on this street it was around 4.9 feet. That's it. So all these different factors led to an area that was inefficient, it was dangerous, and it was confusing for all road users, especially children. So we started, engaging our stakeholders. We started including our parents, the students, the school management. So as you can see here, we introduced the project to the ward officer, who is in charge of project implementations. We then introduced the project to the municipal councillor. We started involving the principal, the school management, the parent-teacher authority, introduced the project to them and showed them the benefits of what our recommendations and our street design would bring to the school. We also included the parents and guardians in the survey. We surveyed around 430 of them. And because our key user group was children and students, we actively involved them in the whole decision-making process, and we kept them really engaged as well. So this is how we did our data collection. It was a photo voice tool. So we conducted a voice with each age group that was organized to understand what children see at their eye level and what is it that they like or dislike. So I'm going to show you a photo right now. If the child is holding a green frame, he or she likes it. And if he's holding a red frame, they don't like it. So we found out that children like seeing the school buses, they like seeing green infrastructure like plants, trees, they liked seeing the sky, they liked seeing the sun, they liked seeing people on the streets, they liked seeing a lot of street activity. What they didn't like was narrow alleyways and dingy spaces, dark spaces. They did not like the fact that footpaths were taken over by vehicles. There was a lot of parking on the sidewalks. Two-wheelers would park there, so that's something they didn't like. They also didn't like that the streets were dirty. We also gave them a visualization exercise to understand what changes they would like to see on their streets. So this was between the age group of 6 and 9. This is between the age group of 10 and 12. And this is between the age group of 13 and 16. So we took everyone's recommendations and suggestions and we classified them into these different categories. So one was nature, accessibility, maintenance, safety, discipline, aesthetics, and activity. So taking all these recommendations, we worked with a local design group, a local urban design firm to come up with a really nice design for a school zone. And we recommended some really great solutions for them. So the design solutions for a safe school zone included demarcations of the school zone using signages, road markings. We provided designated areas for walking and for waiting. We had specific pickup and drop-off points. We had child-friendly spaces with super colorful and educational elements. And we had a really nice and vibrant pedestrian crossing. And this particular project was initially done as a pilot project, which is that we used low-cost materials to give people an idea of what we were coming up with. So just moving on to in detail, the elements that we proposed. So first was a more walkable footpath without any sort of barriers or parked vehicles on it. Barrier-free infrastructure. Safe, vibrant, and a raised pedestrian crossing. Having a raised pedestrian crossing helps slow down speeds. We would have vibrant and playful elements near the school area and access to nature. And yes, a more organized pickup and drop point. And we would also have these really nice educational elements for children to engage with. So now moving on to the trial implementation, monitoring, and evaluation process. Like I mentioned earlier, we started off this project on a more trial basis to let people know what we were coming up with. So it's and this is our general rule of thumb. This is how we usually move forward with projects. We do a trial using the help of with the help of cones, paints, tapes, rubber bollards, things like that, before we move on to a more permanent structure. So the reason why we do this, one is to test out the effectiveness of the project, and two, it's a great way to build community support. So these pilot projects can be implemented for a few days to a few weeks to a few months. As long as people get an idea of what's coming up or what changes are being made to the street, it works. So tactical projects, these are also called as tactical projects, and they typically involve less expensive materials such as paints, traffic cones, planters, anything that you can use to convey your design efficiently, effectively, and safely. And once you've garnered enough community support and funding through these various temporary interventions, you can work towards making it a more permanent change. During the entire process, the one thing that we did was we really made sure we engaged our stakeholders. And this is a really important point. So during the entire process, we ensured that the local residents of the area, the businesses, the institutions, our students were very well aware of the project and the proposed changes that were coming their way. And it's really important that you involve them right from the beginning all the way to the end, even post-construction sometimes. And as you can see here, we've used really inexpensive materials such as signages, barricades, safety cones, and paints to create these various demarcations and design changes. By engaging stakeholders, and in this particular case, it was our residents, the school, students, the school management, parents, we were able to get a lot of feedback about our plan, what works, what does not work, what is it that they like. And it gave them a platform to ask questions and raise their concerns. And eventually they felt a lot more comfortable about the project. It also helped us educate decision makers and officials of that particular, about the value that this project brought into the community. And we try to include a lot of our stakeholders like children and parents during the whole process to make them feel a lot more involved and excited. So this is a top view, an aerial photo of our a pilot project, the trial implementation, which is not yet made, permanent. We're still, sort of studying the space and understanding the results and doing surveys. So as you can see here, we've added colorful guide strips. We have safe waiting spaces. There's a more vibrant pedestrian crossing. We've signages and road markings. We've also inserted a bulb out so that the area is more visible. This is another view. So this project is currently being tested. So once the whole phasing is over, we will get feedback and suggestions from the users, from the parents, from the school community to see what worked and what did not work. And we're going to make it permanent after that. So to conclude, the benefits of a child-friendly city go beyond just children. It adds value to everyone's lives. The amount of time children get to spend playing outdoors and the ability to get around independently and their level of contact with nature are all really strong indicators of how well a city is performing, and not just for children, but like I said, for everyone. So the benefit of a child-friendly city is many. It improves your health and well-being. It increases the economy, safety, nature and sustainability, equity. It's a great catalyst for improving cities and also build stronger communities. It unites a range of progressive agendas. So it goes without saying that a child-friendly approach to urban planning benefits everyone, not just children. And as Mayor Enrique Peñalosa of Bogota once said, children are a kind of indicator species. If we can build a successful city for children, we have a successful city for everyone. I hope you found this really useful. I will share a link of the low speed zone guide in the chat box. And please have a look and please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikita. I think it's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it is.
Agree that not only children are going to benefit from that, everybody benefits from safer environments. And we do have a couple of questions in the chat. I want to encourage everybody to type their questions in the chat while we have a little time to talk about it. First, what pushback or resistance did you encounter and how did you address or resolve that?
Of course, we did get a lot of initial concerns and resistance from the local community, because obviously they had no idea what was coming their way. This was not something that was done before. So this is when your trial projects or your pilot projects come into place. Making sure that your residents are involved, making sure the community is involved. And these are all done with really temporary measures. If it doesn't work, you can always take it out. If you're getting a lot of resistance, if they're not happy with it, you can always take it out. It's just barricades, paint, reflective tapes. It's not a permanent infrastructure. But it's all the time we've realized that these temporary projects are always a win. People love it. It's always been successful. And once they see it works, they're more than happy to make it a more permanent project. So, and it eventually scales up. So we start off with one, we start with a pilot project, we get everyone involved, they see all the benefits that it brings, it's made permanent, and then it starts scaling into various other sections in the neighborhood or the city. It's always been that way.
Thank you. And we have one more question. It is, when engaging stakeholders, which method of engagement did you find generated the most involvement?
Right. So we did a lot of surveys. That's the first part. It really helps when we do have a lot of successful projects to show them that, hey, this is what we've done and this is the success that it's brought through. But the first important part was just having a lot of surveys and answering their questions and having focus group discussions. Just taking our time to understand their needs and making sure everything that they have in mind is answered and then as we progress through with the project, we involve them as much as possible. We always make sure we engage our stakeholders in whatever way possible. So surveys, asking them to be a part of our discussions, asking them to be a part of our design group discussions, all of that was really helped.
Right, thank you. Wendy, do we see any more questions in the chat?
No, there are not. No more questions.
Okay, I see one more question was in my direct message, so no one can see it but me. But can you tell us if you had any outreach that was specific to the children? I know, like you had the little green and red signs, but any other outreach that was specific to them?
This was one of our first projects in India, specifically trying to create, safer access to schools for children specifically. I don't know if that's what is that what you meant? If you could explain it a little better. Are you talking about ways to involve children as a part of the project?
Right, or to let them know what was going on, yes.
Yeah, so we did use the photo voice method. We did ask them what they want to see, but we should also keep in mind that there are different age groups to consider. And we made sure that the assignments or the little fun quizzes that we provided for them was based on what they could understand and targeted specifically for an age group. So we had groups between 6 to 9, 10 to 14, 18 to 19, and the complexity of the surveys or the questions and the discussions varied according to that. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, I did. Thank you. And again, thank you very much for coming and presenting today. I know that you may have to leave a little early because it is in the middle of the night where you are, and we don't want to keep you all night, although we'd love to have you stay with us all night, but you definitely can hop off when you need to. And you told us about the importance of building a safe community for children in terms of traffic and streets. And next up, we're going to hear about building safe communities in terms of play areas and natural areas and a little bit about compliance. We're going to hear from Adam Bienenstock. He is the founder and CEO of Bienenstock Natural Playgrounds. If you want to learn more about him, I'm not going to read his bio. It is in the agenda, which I posted in the chat, and I will post again in a minute, but I don't want to take up his time by reading to you, so I will turn it over to Adam. Thank you. Welcome.
Thanks, Andrea. I'm just going to share my screen here, and hopefully I'll be able to see this thing when it comes up. All right.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'm not sure. I'm hoping this isn't a familiar situation for many of the people on the call, but it certainly caught my attention. I have been with people on sites where this is the sort of question that we have when we're getting into a design on a public space. The interesting thing about this, and I've been, just to give you a bit of my history, I'm one of the co-authors on the Systematic Lit Review on Outdoor Risky Play, which is a long-worded way of saying I read an awful lot and been involved in the research around risk and play and injury. And while we run a company that is focused on connecting kids to nature through urban space, through the built environment, through parks, a lot of the expertise for our work actually comes out of understanding what risk really is. Interestingly enough, in this picture, that tree actually will get run into more often. It's because it's the kid on the third kid. There's very few games to play here. There's chasing each other and not a lot else when you think it through. So we actually need to have more. More actually is better. That whole phrase, less is more. That's actually not a good phrase when it comes to play and comes to kid and animating these spaces. So what is good? The third kid, by the way, in the tag run is the one who runs into this tree. The solution is there needs to be more trees. There needs to be significantly more sensory experience. That's what's actually going to make the difference to whether or not these kids are resilient as they grow up and are engaged cognitively when they play. I'm going to show you this one. This is a picture. This is basically what I did when I was a kid. This was normal for me. I was up the creek. I was where there was the blue clay on one side and the red clay on the other side. And then we built forts amongst here. And as soon as the other groups of kids were gone, we raided their forts and took their stuff and made our fort bigger and better and yummier. And these are, I want you to think for a second, just as context, I want you to think for a second of your favorite thing that you did when you were a young kid. When you were, let's say, 7, 8 years old, whatever it is that you think of, I want you to think about that. It shouldn't take you long to get there. I've shown you mine. And you can use the chat if you like, or you can just think about this for yourself. How many senses were engaged in that thing that you're remembering right now? How many senses were engaged? Mine's easy. You're looking at it. Mine was all 5. Pretty simple, right? So I'm interested in how many senses were engaged. When you think about your favorite things, I will tell you it's a cheat question. The answer amongst most of you, if you really think about those things that you loved, are going to be 4, 5 senses, or it wouldn't be the one that you loved. The way we are wired is to actually experience the world through those senses. The ones we remember, the stuff that makes the information sticky, is actually those sensory experiences. The less sensory the experience becomes, the less cognitively engaged the kid becomes, and the more likely they are to end up injured, the less resilient they are. And there's a number of other outcomes that are interesting as well. But what I'm really interested in is how does the resilient landscape, this is Prospect Park in New York. This is one of Olmsted's parks, and the same thing is true of Central Park. Some of the most important designs of parks out there, these are built as resilient landscapes that are reflections of the patterns that are in the resilient landscapes of today. Now, this is Harold Fisk's work, mapping out the Mississippi River and all of its various permutations dating back for 100 years. And if you look at these patterns and some of Olmsted's work, this is what it takes, these layers of pathways. These are the ways in which kids move. You make everything linear and square and clean, and you draw it all on a computer, and you don't think about the experiences of the kid. Well, you end up without a landscape. You end up with a landscape. This is in a floodplain in a park that we worked on, where the play affordance is the thing that we're really interested in. There's a wheelchair accessible path that connects across a bridge somewhere else. That does not mean that we remove the kids from where the water is, from the spots where they can hide. For a resilient landscape to work for kids, we need 4 things, not just a place to climb, but we need a place for them to be able to hide or feel like they disappear, a quiet contemplative place. We need a place for them to use fine motor, their fingers, their touch. And we need a place for them to be creative or dramatic. And the natural landscapes and these natural forms lend themselves to that kind of work. We do this work in urban centers across the country. And there's all kinds of data that comes out of this stuff. And I'm not going to spend too much time on each one of these, but there's some important drivers of the work. One of them, which is really interesting to me, before this pandemic hit, we honestly weren't doing very well on this stat before. So the average screen time for an 8-year-old prior to the pandemic, if you're thinking about drivers of nature play, I know people are hearing about this more and more now. 52 hours a week, 52 and a half hours a week, Kaiser Family Foundation study, was the average for an 8-year-old in North America. The average that has been published in the last 2 months, 2 different studies, one showed 75 hours a week of screen time, and the second showed 95 hours a week during the pandemic. It has gotten significantly worse. Now, I have a weird background. I will admit that. My dad, if you look him up, is actually, his Wikipedia page refers to him as the father of mucosal immunology. He is a very smart man who does very interesting research around the immune response to biodiverse environments. Quite specifically, he is in the business of understanding and how to predict and prevent massive stress reactions. And if we were to think about something that has been on the rise amongst our kids and amongst our communities, it has been stress and anxiety in the last year or two. He is funded by the US Army significantly because he's located these macro and microorganisms that live in soil at the base of trees. And these macro and microorganisms, that gut biome in your gut, that stuff that you get from being in contact with a biodiverse environment, a resilient landscape, makes the resilience in the children. Those macro microorganisms, as it turns out, have a better effect on PTSD when ingested than any of the current drug formulations. And that is why these landscapes are so directly related to the resilience of our children. So the part that I find fascinating is resilient children actually require multisensory experiences. We need to have natural environments that they have access to in order to give them those multisensory experiences. Their injury rates drop as soon as we give them that multisensory experience where their brain gets engaged. And then beyond that, we end up with a more resilient for storm surge, for flood mitigation, a more resilient landscape by designing our parks with these various surfaces and natural elements in them. And yet we see, in terms of sensory experience, we see stuff like this going on, which I think is a bit nuts. But I mean, I love that the sensory experience on this one is actually a dumpster in behind. It's kind of like the perfect wrong landscape. So I guess I should show you, this is the picture of what a natural landscape is not. Why would we put our kids through something like this? And yet, for the sake of, I'm not sure what, a misguided attempt at safety, I believe, we end up with those things. We also are seeing in plastic and steel now, we're starting to see the idea of the things up at the tops of this. They refer to these as their forest tree series. I'm not sure how much shade they're casting in this one. And that things are starting to look like or mimic nature, when that does not give you the macro microbiota that you need in your gut biome to have a resilient child. That does not give you the sensory engagement that they need. And you're not fooling anyone when you do things that look like nature or things that you might find in nature, but are not. I always look at this one and think it's like the perfect, this really is the perfect wrong if I had to think of one. This is a real thing, by the way, if you want to look it up. It's called the pooping elephant slide. You can look it up and see it from all the angles. In fact, what engages kids more are these natural elements that they can touch and feel that they can be part of. And when you will be looking at this, I know for a fact that some of you will see a Chinese dragon. Some of you will see maybe, I see a dog. I can't not see a dog on this one. And sometimes risk managers tell me they see splinters, but the truth is the lawsuits are low on this. You do not have lawsuits on these things. And I can tell you this with some surety at this stage. We have built over 3,000 environments for kids that are purely natural, authentic spaces. And we do not have a single claim in our history of injury, not ever. So this stuff works if you think it through. The cognitive engagement is required. You can take risks that you might be afraid of. But if those kids are fully engaged in that activity, and you're using those natural objects that you can find. We work with forestry departments to help them to figure out how to take advantage of the stuff that's actually waste. The tragedy of a forester or of an urban arborist is that they become an arborist because they love trees, and then sadly they make a living cutting them down. If you want to make a forester happy, you could figure out these things, and you know, that's part of my favorite part of the job is to talk to foresters to figure out how they can help with the things that you are paying for in our cities to get rid of, to turn them into ecological restoration that also serves to help with the resilience of your community. Important to note that there are some markers worth paying attention to. So spontaneous social collaboration is a big deal. That is when two kids play with each other, not because they were directed to by either the apparatus or by the parent or the grandparent or the teacher supervising them, but because they wanted to. Across age, across gender, across culture, across language, you will see the numbers get better the more sensory the play elements are. And that's why we are actually starting to see this comeback of some of these sorts of elements. We're also seeing it in sculptural elements that start to draw in. People would ask me, hey, this one's not going to be ASTM compliant. And the answer is, of course not. There's a million pinch points on this thing. However, as sculpture, the ASTM standard does not apply to this. It's a wheelchair accessible space that allows for kids to be interpreting it for play, that is both durable and sustainable and playful, cognitively engaging, makes people think, creates lesson plans around programming so that schools and other animators can become involved in these things. And if we lose that lens of the child, we start to make some dumb decisions. So I love the fact that the fence guy thought this is where the fence should go. That is my kid actually on the back. He is now responsible on this hopscotch game for 1 to 3. And his friend finishes the game for him, which is a little bit bonkers, but I didn't have to make him look sad to take this picture. He just was. We need to have that lens of what it is to be a child and why that's important when we're thinking about designing the resilience into our communities and our children. That lens, as Nikita has just been talking about, we have to think about what works for them. We have to ask them. I'm not sure if you'd find a child who said that this was a good idea. And there's all kinds of studies around this. A couple of them worth mentioning. I have mentioned the systematic lit review that I was part of. If you are worried about risk of injury, if you're concerned about play and what your liabilities are, you should be reassured by looking at a paper that says that play is not a risky event. Lack of play, as it turns out, is much more risky for kids. The outcomes are much worse. The injury rates increase. So we need to think about these events more than the apparatus, what we've discovered in our work, more than the apparatus itself. The sensory engagement of the child has a deeper effect on the injury rates than the actual apparatus. And then the Helsinki alert, that's when all the immunologists got together and said, this idea, nature deficit disorder that we may have heard of, that Richard Luke coined a few years back in a book he put out in 2005, that is not, according to Richard Louvre, a real thing. The Helsinki alert was saying, no, it's a real thing. We're the immunologists, and this is real. Without that contact with nature, they become less able to assess risk. And so there's a direct risk of injury, and there is also a direct injury to their immune system. If you do not get that contact early enough, there's a problem. In that context, I want you to think about where you played when you were a kid, at the schools, not where you were playing, but at the schools or at the public parks. And were those public parks paved, or were they green and rich? I'll put it to you, and we put it to the kids. We won the ASLA Award for Learning Landscapes in this project a few years back. When we asked the kids a year later what their favorite part of this was, 52% pointed to the forest behind this, not at the thing that we did. It was so
Well, it looks like we may have lost Mr. Bienenstock. I know one of his staff members is
He's
here.
back, Andrea.
Oh, he's back. Okay.
I think, let me just unmute him. Give me 1 second.
Sorry about that. That was strange.
There it goes. Okay.
Is the share back or is it back on?
No, we cannot see your screen. We can only see you.
Oh, sorry about that. I'm not nearly as pretty as these pictures, so I apologize for that.
There you go.
All right,
We can see you now.
we're there
Thank you.
now? Cool. So these resilient landscapes that I'm talking about actually can use a lot of the waste that you have in your cities. This is working with a forestry group out in Denver. Now, we can't just stuff the trees in that were local in order to make this work. We have to be considerate of the split that's going to happen. So we're sealing and sealing and sealing, and it can look like it's sitting in the dirt without it actually sitting in the dirt. What's actually happening when we're doing this underground is it has a series of different ways to hold it up, because I know for some of the people who are actually doing this, in order to be an option for you to think about from the ASTM standard and from your insurance and liability standards, it needs to meet with all of those. So this is what a sideways tree looks like that's fully ASTM compliant. I think as the grown-ups, we have a duty to make this stuff work for the kids. It does not need to be this complicated. The truth is that the majority of the kids that you're going to have in your community, if you genuinely ask, in a sensory rich pop-up environment, this is something that they're going to go for more than just the physical play components. The physical play components are important. There's all kinds of physical and creative play that goes in these rich environments. Shade matters. If you think about Nikita's slides that she just went through, shade matters. Sensory experience, natural elements that they can touch and feel. If you can add water, this one is the simplest playground I've ever seen. It's a bunch of logs from the forestry department. It is a pile of sand and it's a hose. Everything else is community driven. We can get complicated with this stuff, and there are certain pieces around vestibular movement for kids that helps them to calm and become focused and become centered. We can get very complicated, very expensive, and be fully ASTM and ADA compliant with natural elements. So it's not to say you can't do that. Of course you can. But you don't have to go plastic and steel and non-sensory in order to have these experiences available to the kids. The truth is that the kids march beyond this piece and look for this opportunity more often. They will have a hook perhaps, and maybe that's part of the work that we all have to do together. What are we doing to hook the parents to make them understand that this is a safe environment to go to, so that they can go beyond that to the wild spaces where the kids will play together and create together and engage. This is down in an Olmsted Park, which is the Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden, where each month, for insurance purposes, these kids are allowed to make all of this stuff and build all of this stuff. And at the end of a 30-day cycle, in order to meet the insurance requirements for this to be temporary, this is pulled apart with the Parks Department and the kids into its base components. And then they build again, and they build again, and they build again. And every month, it's become part of the tradition for the Parks Department, the first Tuesday of every month, to pull it apart. That allows them to meet the insurance requirements for this activity, to not be considered a permanent installation and sit outside of the standard. These are child-created environments, and as a result of that, they're able to sort of carry on. You can see how the living material and the sort of dunnage and forestry bits actually mix together in something like this. I often see fake boulders going into these spaces, and I'm confused by this, because real boulders are less expensive and way cooler and way more durable. There are ways to do this, and I feel like we're obligated to do that. Still ADA compliant. These moving pieces allow you for vestibular movement in place. And yet I see a whole whack of risk managers who go, real boulder. This is my favorite picture, by the way, of a real boulder. That is not a problem until you put this fence up. The problem with this one is not the boulder. The problem is the rebar at eye poke out height for covering up the boulder, which is madness. We start to do things in reaction to things that are really not a risk. We should really look at what the real risks are. When it comes to the compliance with the standards, I just want to give you a quick note on this. It's not always that great a standard. According to this, apparently the Canadians mature 6 months faster than Americans, by the way. I'm from Boston, so I guess I didn't mature until I was 2. The standards are not written for child development. They are written for equipment manufacturers. We can do fully compliant boulders. We want kids to be able to be sensory engaged when they're taking these risks. At some point in their life, they will be taking a different set of risks. I would want them to know how to do this before they start to go out and find this other way to take those same risks with a beer in their hand. It is important to us that they become better at assessing risk before the risks become too great. You want to reduce injury rates and create safe environments. You want to do that as early as you can. What I find fascinating is when we go to Europe, when we go to Berlin, for instance, these are a series of playgrounds that would not be compliant in the US. I love these, by the way, just for fun. This is trampolines, and the impact rated surface is cobblestone. Not something we can do here. I'm not recommending that you do. What's interesting about that, though, is that their injury rates are no higher, in fact, are lower than they are in the US currently when it comes to young children. And the one at the top I just think is awesome. It's actually, I don't know what it's called. I call it the child launcher. The grown-up jumps up and down and just shoots kids in the air until they cry. I think it's funny and kind of terrible at the same time. Again, injury rates, if you start early enough and have sensory experience and risk assessment combined, injury rates, in spite of this stuff, get better. So how would we do that in our landscapes? The methods are to add layers of richness to the landscapes. This is landscape form, and yet a lot of those risks are built in. Again, things I'm recommending to you right now do not increase statistically your risk of injury. Statistically, anything under that 3-foot level, regardless of the surface, does not increase the risk of a hospital visit. This is why we don't have the claims. It's because we think very carefully about this. Most of the injuries are happening above 6.5, 7 feet because of the fall dynamic, not because of the impact rating, and because of the lack of sensory engagement during those risks. The more senses, the better off we are. You head over to other places, and there's something, I just love this as an idea. I'm not suggesting you do it, but I just want to give you an example of what happens in other countries that does not necessarily increase the level of injury. This is a crazy thing in Kings Park, just outside of Perth. And I was talking to the manager there of this, what I think is completely off the hook madness. Again, not recommending this, but think about this. This is in a public park. And I asked him, like, how can you get away with this? And he says, it's no problem, mate. It's human, blinko. which is like, for me, was one of the funniest things I've heard someone say out loud. The idea is he would hit every rope on the way down, so the fall at the end is not that big. The truth is, if you make this a graduated challenge, if we make our stuff a graduated challenge for kids, where they have to have where they get to the risky place, but they have to have crazy physical acuity and ability, balance and agility score, kinesthetic sense, in order to get to the maximum risk, they actually are fully tuned in and less likely to injure when they're in the middle of it. The most important stuff that I wanted to cover on this was that if you want to make a resilient community, if you want to make a resilient landscape, you have to think of it through the lens of what are the things that have to get engaged. It goes back to the beginning of what we were saying. All 5 senses engaged means lower injury rates. This is the simplest of all of the equations. All 5 senses engaged are going to require you to actually plant more and more thoroughly and more thoughtfully. But there are three more things that really matter in these spaces that we're doing with our kids and for our communities. And we ask our kids about these things. And what it comes back to on the science is the things that they choose actually help them with kinesthetic sense. So the idea that a single log is a trip hazard is wrong. It is not a trip hazard unless it's just the one thing sitting in the empty park. To go back to that very first slide, you need more. You need richness in order for them to be able to be slowing down and be more thoughtful. In fact, kids behave particularly well the more engagement, the more physical engagement you put in. So kinesthetic sense is where your arms and legs are in relation to your body. That's balance and agility scores. Harsh reality in the US is that balance and agility scores have plummeted over the last 20 years. Angela Hanscom, an occupational therapist who uses nature as her therapy tool, did some preliminary study in 1984, and what came out of that preliminary study was a baseline for children when it comes to their core strength, physical ability. And what happens with those kids, and these are the core things that are also ironically required for reading and writing, the ability to sit still and focus, has a huge amount to do with this level of engagement physically. These kids, it turns out more recently, when we looked at the study just a few years ago, it used to be that 1 in 12 kids were not prepared for standard reading and writing, or sorry, 1 in 20 kids were not prepared for standard reading and writing due to the kinesthetic sense and the scores they had. Today, it is 1 in 12 are actually prepared for reading and writing when it comes to their core strength. We are plummeting because of our lack of sensory engagement and a lack of creativity when we think about our spaces. Sense of belonging is also important. A sense of place is important. It should not look like everything I just showed you. It should look like a reflection of your local landscape and be relevant. And then the last one is something that I think we just need more of across the board. It's why you would flip a tree upside down. It's why you would have these natural elements with quartz pinging through the granite so that that kid, my kid, could stand there. My kid does not stand still, but he could stand there and look up for 30 seconds because that tree was flipped upside down and he didn't understand why. That sense of wonder can happen with a chrysalis. It can happen with a living landscape, but that's an important piece of the work. So with that, I will end it because I see, Andrea, you're on.
Oh, I feel like you could sense that I was ready to say something, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Never in the entire pandemic have I wished more for us to all be in the room right now so that when I ask who wants to go play on Adam's slides, I could see everybody raise their hands. How fabulous this is. I know we have one question in the chat. We actually had a couple of questions in the chat, but I know Wendy's going to give us one of them for right now.
Yep. In the picture of the European playgrounds, there were more adults in the play field than I feel is common in the US. Do you believe that nature plays engages more multi-generational participation? If so, how?
Well, the short answer is yes. And I think it starts when you do a public consultation. And I was thinking about what Nikita was talking about as well. Public consultation matters a lot. So we have robust consultation at the beginning where parents and kids and counselors are actually on the site and we're walking the site together and we're sharing food and we spend hours together talking about what's going to come out of this. We also do a community building exercise with parents and the community as part of the process as well. So those families, those grandparents, they all own it. It's very different in Europe and in some of the stuff that we showed out there versus the Canadian and American experience. Grandparents and parents are there to supervise kids on plastic and steel post and platform structures. The average time that kids stay, according to the plastic and steel manufacturers, is 19 to 22 minutes. The average time in a nature-based play space, when you have those communities be part of the design, is somewhere between 1 hour and 7 and 1 hour and 17. Those stats don't come from me. Those stats come from various different universities in Arizona and Tennessee and in Winnipeg. in the US, if you make the play experience non-sensory, you do not end with the collaborative play, because I'm telling you, the grandparent and the kid is not on the plastic and steel together. The grandparent is around the edge with their hands out, worried that they might fall. So there's a difference in the way in which we play in these public spaces, and it's related directly to the sensory engagement of those spaces. And Europeans have done, especially in Scandinavia, and now more and more so in England, are starting to do more nature play. I work with a guy named Tim Gill out in the UK, and there's been a lot of effort to bring those sensory experiences in. The better you do with that, the better you do with the multi-generational side.
Thank you. I think we had one more question about bullying, Wendy.
You said about bullying?
Bullying, yes.
But the interesting thing around bullying and the data around this is that the aggressive behavior rates, the physically, the A-type kid, if you think about the standard sort of rubber surface, plastic and steel, it's a perfect king of the castle mechanism. If you look at the data around the physical activity, 30% of the kids in those environments are doing 70% of the physical activity. And what we actually want, and for not as long either. So what we start to see, the rates for us around bullying, what we're doing before and afters in schools, is between an 87 and 92% reduction in the bullying rates at the schools, just with the physical intervention of a multi-sensory space that's fully planted. So massive drops in the aggressive behavior rates. And again, they are related directly to two factors. One is the sensory engagement, and the second one is having different types of spaces that don't purely focus on gross motor, but also focus on quiet contemplative space, on a place of for creative and dramatic, and for fine motor. And they look at those equally and promote those equally to the gross motor spaces. If you do both of those things in a sensory way, well, then every kid gets a place of mastery, and the kid who would never go to run the gauntlet with the A-type kid has a way in, and as the A-type kid cycles out, the other kids move in without competition, and the aggressive behavior rates in the bullying starts to dissipate. So big gains, if you do this stuff properly, big gains in bullying rates. And it's actually one of the reasons we do most of our work with our schools.
That sounds fantastic. I can't imagine anybody not wanting to hear about how you can decrease bullying through this kind of activity. We had some more questions in chat because this is a fantastic presentation, but I think we're going to be able to move on and maybe we can address those in the panel. But also I know that your colleague posted her email address and phone number if people want to reach out directly to talk to you after. Sure. So we've been outside for this entire presentation, and now we're going to continue to be outside as Dr. Sara Candiracci, who's an associate director at Arup, and she leads the work on inclusive and resilient cities, including a portfolio on child-centered design and planning. She's going to tell us a little bit about, or maybe a lot about, hopefully, some tools and methods for designing an urban childhood. Dr. Candiracci?
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for inviting me. Let me share. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. So thanks a lot for the invitation. Thanks a lot to Nikita and Adam for the great presentation we just heard, because they're very relevant and inspirational. So my name is Sara. I'm an urban planner's background. I work at Arup. I'm based in London. And Arup is an independent firm, multidisciplinary firm of designers, planners, engineers, and technical specialists. We basically work across every aspect of the built environment. Arup was founded 75 years ago, and we work globally. We're like more or less 16,000, especially with different backgrounds, with offices around the world. So Arup has been involved now for several years on designing for urban childhoods, as we are committed to create healthier and more inclusive and resilient, and of course, green environments that work for everyone, in particular, looking at the most vulnerable groups in society, including children and women or elderly people. because we know that as urban practitioners, we know that the environment in which children live and grow is a key factor to consider when talking about their well-being and their development. In fact, when we design spaces and places, consider the needs of children, we need to consider that children require not only the basic and functional needs as good nutrition, healthcare, education, clean air. These are all important, but children also need plenty of opportunities to explore, play, to experience nature, and also to experience warm and responsive human interactions in the built environment where they live. So today, I'd like to briefly present some of the challenges that children face in cities. I'm not going to talk a lot about that because Nikita covered very well the topic. I'm also going to briefly present some of the benefits of a child-centered design and planning approach. But what I like to focus my presentation today is on two specific tools that Arup, together with the partners I'm going to introduce later, we've been developing for helping decision makers, urban practitioners, community groups to design and plan child and family-friendly cities. So starting with the challenges, so based on our work and also comparing 40 cities around the world located in different geographies and with different socioeconomic conditions, we saw that how children experience cities is different from place to place. So it's very important to design solutions that respond to their specific needs, and so to tailor like global good practices to specific contexts, to specific needs that you identify in the place where you work. But in relation to challenges, we saw that there are some underlying challenges which are often the same across cities. Nikita spoke quite a lot and very well about traffic and pollution. That is a huge problem in many cities globally, which is affecting the children's physical and mental development, and also they are hindering their independent mobility, which is very important for children. Another challenge is about sprawling cities, which are encouraging car dependency, so are increasing traffic and as a consequence, again, air pollution. While when also overly dense high-rise type of living can also lead to isolation. There is then what we saw, there is a challenge related to parents' perception and risk aversion in relation to risk and accident and crime that in many cases justify, but at the same time, again, is hindering the capacity of children to also live the built environment on their own, to explore and also to take some risk, as Adam presented very well. And then what is also important is the lack of the poor quality of green spaces, and also the uneven distribution of playful spaces in streets, and lack of access to this. And this, of course, is creating social inequalities across cities. We also acknowledge that over the past decades, most cities have not prioritized, most cities, city makers have not prioritized children in the planning and design of cities. They've been focusing on the needs, mainly on the needs of a healthy, working 30-year-old adult, possibly men. And so cities have been designed to be smart, to be competitive, to be efficient, but they've not been designed considering the needs of the most vulnerable groups in society, including children or elderly population. In particular, cars have pushed children from the streets in which I mean, when I was a kid, I was more living in the countryside, but I was always outside, and children could play more freely in streets. Now it's very difficult that this happens. And so we can say that children have been designed out of streets, public spaces, neighborhoods, and also housing estates. And this picture also shows how children's ability to roam their neighborhood has decreased over the past century. This is the map, the plan of Rotterdam. And this has decreased from a radius of 6 miles to 300 yards. And independent mobility is influenced by different elements, including the proximity, the choice and availability of things to do, the presence of road crossing, and also children age and gender, and also the perceptions of safety by both children and adults, so their caregivers. So with less independent mobility, children have a reduced ability to navigate and experience the city. So this means also fewer opportunities for children for learning social interactions, also for playful journeys and discovery. We also saw, Nikita already covered this, that where steps have been taken to enhance children's experience in cities, that there are different benefits that are not relevant only for children, but for the entire society and the planet. In fact, by focusing on the needs of children, there is the potential to unite a range of progressive agendas and also to generate multiple benefits, including health and well-being, nature and sustainability, create and boost the local economy, and also to create a stronger sense of identity and communities, and also climate resilience. So one of the first tool that we recently launched at COP26 is the Playful Cities Toolkit. This was developed by us, Arup, in collaboration with the LEGO Foundation and in partnership with the Real Play Coalition. And we developed this tool to provide a technical instrument or a collection of technical tools that help to help city authorities, urban practitioners, professionals working in cities to understand play in cities and to design play-based solutions that also help developing children skills. So the toolkit was developed, as I said, as part of the partnership of the Real Play Coalition, which is a global not-for-profit coalition, which was created a couple of years ago with the vision to change the perception around the value of play and also to mainstream the adoption of learning through play concepts, norms, and practices globally. And the coalition includes IKEA, UNICEF, Arup, National Geographic, and the LEGO Foundation. So the coalition came together because we know that play is essential, is key for children's well-being and development, and also to build their resilience, also to build communities, and also, as Adam said, nature-based play in particular is so important for the health, physical and mental well-being, also for creating a connection with nature, and also for that as a result, also by adopting nature-based solutions that are focusing on play, there is also a great impact in terms of climate resilience. But we know, based on data and experience, that play is struggling to find a place in the lives of many children today. This is happening all around the world and for different reasons. And there are many barriers to play. One is related to urbanization or reduced access to open spaces. One is related to changes in urban life. As I said, there is a risk aversion from parents in relation to leaving children to go outside. At the same time, children are very busy and parents are very busy. Also, what we saw that there is limited evidence and knowledge of the state and value of play, and so the lack of evidence to influence change, and also limited guidance for city authorities and urban planners on how to design child-friendly cities. So to address these challenges and gaps, we've been collaborating with the LEGO Foundation and also other members of the Real Play Coalition to generate evidence on the value of play in design and planning, and also to provide guidance and practical solutions to support the design and adoption of play-based solutions or interventions. We started by developing the Urban Play Framework, which is a planning tool that helps understanding the different dimensions of play in cities. And we identify 3 key dimensions which are critical for designing playful environments. One is about facilitation for play, so it's looking at understanding if play is actively supported by caregivers, teachers, community members, and city authorities. The second dimension is about understanding the time and choices for play, so looking at understanding if children have adequate time and choice to engage in stimulating play activities. The third dimension is about spaces and facilities for play, so looking at understanding if children have access to adequate and quality spaces, facilities, and equipment for play. And these 3 dimensions are considered at different urban scales, which are the household, the school, the neighborhood, at the city level. And also, the framework considers the 5 skills that children can develop through play activities, which are creative, social, physical, emotional, and cognitive skills. So the Urban Play Framework is at the core of the Playful Cities Toolkit, which provides a range of resources to support, as I said, government authorities, practitioners, communities to understand play in cities, different dimensions of play, and also to guide the design of play-based solution, and also to measure impact. So the toolkit is interactive, is available online, and is structured on a simplified design process, which includes understand, design, and measure. And it is possible to navigate the toolkit and download existing tools by clicking the underlined text in the guide in the toolkit. So in the understand section, it's possible to download tools and templates to guide desk-based study, fieldwork, and also to develop a summary report with key challenges and opportunities which are identified in the target area, and also consider different urban scales and systems. In this slide, you can see some of the tools that you can download from the toolkit, also for including for organizing assessment workshops with children, communities, to undertake a transit walk, also to organize a key informal interview or a photo contest, for instance. And the play assessment tool is particularly important because it is structured considering the 3 dimensions of the urban play framework. And each dimension has 4 goals at the household, school, neighborhood, and city level, which indicate what needs to be achieved to create a playful environment. And also each goal can be assessed considering a set of factors or aspects that contribute to create a playful environment. And also the tool also says how to assess or observe these factors and which specific tools can be used. In the design section of the toolkit, you can download tools to support the planning and design of play-based interventions. So in particular, you see here a screenshot of the play prioritization tool that can be used to undertake a consistent evaluation of the factors that influence children's play experience within a specific site. And you do this evaluation considering different benchmarks of what good looks like. There is also a consolidated score by factors and goals that enable the user to analyze results and also to generate a visual that illustrates priority areas to play where you need to focus to your interventions. We also included a selection of case studies to inspire multiple ideas, action, and strategies aiming at promoting play in cities. While from the measure section, you can download the play impact tool, which is similar to the prioritization tool, but allows to evaluate the impact of the play-based intervention, the impact that a play-based intervention has had on children and the broader community. So the toolkit, the framework and the toolkit, we've been using it and testing it and so refining it through the work in 3 different cities and contexts. In fact, we work in London, we work in Cape Town, and we work in Milan most recently. In London, we work with the Barnet Council and the Royal Town Planning Institute in the community of Barn Oak. And there we undertook a comprehensive participatory assessment and also using a co-creation process. We involved children from the age of 0 because they came with the caregivers, and children up to age of 16, and also involved the caregivers and also the local community using different methods from participatory mapping, consultation, interviews, and also we organized a workshop with the Lego bricks. And the results of the study are summarized in the play profile report, which is available online. We also decided to work in an informal settlement in the township of Kalicha in Cape Town because we wanted to understand the play dynamics in an informal settlement. So in a context that is very vulnerable, that is the kind of opposite than London. So also there, when they took a comprehensive play assessment, we engage children, communities. We also run a photo contest, and we organize co-creation workshops to understand the state of play in the township, and also identifying relevant solutions for the context. So with the insight from this work, we developed a network of play spaces which were designed to stimulate the development of different skills, so social, emotional, and cognitive skills, as I mentioned before. So how through play learning through play can actually help children and how they to develop these skills and the interaction with these environments. The activation is ongoing. We started before COVID. We had to stop. Now we restarted again. So we're planning to finalize the project in Cape Town by end of December. And so then there will be also a report presenting this initiative. So in Milan, we follow a similar process. We work in collaboration with the City Authority of Milan, with their resilience and education departments. So we conducted a participatory assessment, a photo context, and also we organize co-creation activities with children in the local community to understand the context, and again, always using the urban play framework. In fact, you can see here in the slide how we develop some infographic showing the performance of the neighborhood in relation to each dimension of the framework. For instance, we saw that facilitation for play is promoted by the presence of a solid network of association, and that there are spaces available for play, but there is lack of safe connection systems which are limiting movements, and that so they are not allowing to take full advantage of these play opportunities. We also organize different workshops to co-create with children possible play interventions in the neighborhood. So we use, again, different methods from drawing to Lego bricks, and also Arup augmented reality tool, which is called Yard. And we organized the first play street in Milan to engage community in the study area. And also we use the insight from this play street through the activities of the play street to inform our work. In fact, this work helped us to develop a play strategy, which is focusing on 3 key pillars. One is about the creation of a network of play spaces. One is about the promotion of the school, the role of the school at the center of the neighborhood relations, and also the use of the digital play as a bridge to physical play. And a summary of our work is available in the play activation report, which is also available online. And this is another tool, a design guide that we developed and launched this year as well. March this year, we developed in collaboration with the Bienenstock Foundation, which is a Dutch foundation focusing on the needs of young children. So developing from 0 to 5 years and the caregivers. So we developed, to develop the proximity of care design guide, we combine Arup's design and planning expertise with the Bienenstock Foundation knowledge of early childhood development, because with the intent of developing a practical tool to support city authorities, practitioners, and also child development experts in the design and implementation of child and family-friendly interventions. The target area for this guide are informal settlement and refugee settlements, but now we are working to upscale the guide and also to review parts of the guide so that it can be relevant for different types of context. And the proximity of care approach is at the core of the design guide, and it was developed to better understand and articulate how different urban systems relate to early childhood development, in particular looking at vulnerable contexts. And the approach considers 4 dimensions, which are key for optimal child development, focusing so on the health, protection, stimulation, and support needs of young children, their caregivers, and pregnant women as they move through their daily lives and routine in their environment. And the proximity of care design guide is a digital platform available online, and it is structured around 3 core sections, which are understand, design, and influence. And under each section, we identify key principles, practical tools, and inspiring case studies to support the users of the guide to understand the context and the beneficiaries of their study area, to design meaningful and cost-effective interventions, and to influence the decision makers and planners on why a child-focused approach is important and how it will benefit their work. So in order to design meaningful and effective intervention, it's important to start with a comprehensive understanding of the local context and beneficiaries. Also, we need to ensure a meaningful engagement with children and their community, and we need to value local resources, skills, and patterns, and also derive multiple benefits from everyday spaces. While under the design section, key principles include that there is the need to build health and safety by design, to create network of open spaces and social infrastructure, and other key principles are to take play and learning beyond playgrounds and schools, and to connect the community inside out, and also, most importantly, connect children with nature. And in order to influence decision makers and urban professionals, it is important that in the projects that we design, we embed elements such as building awareness about early childhood development, empower local leaders and champions, and also open a clear and transparent and constant line of communication between local authorities, practitioners, and local communities. The guide, as I said, was developed and conceived before COVID-19 and mainly aimed at informal refugee settlement. But now we are reviewing it. We're making sure that it becomes relevant for different typological contexts. And so we also start a new phase of the project where we are supporting 6 cities authorities around the world, 6 cities around the world to use this guide and to use it in their context. So we are also going to support these cities to design interventions that then will be implemented. So please take a look at these tools. They are all available online. And please get in touch if you like to hear more about our work. Thank you very much.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Jeff Table, and I'm the Director of Community and Environmental Planning, and had hoped to address you with welcoming remarks, but the internet went out at my house, so I had to come into the office. Let me first say, are there any questions, Wendy, for Sara?
Yes, one just came in. It says, what are the first few steps you'd recommend to get started making a more playful city, perhaps in the short term while working on longer term projects?
Yeah, well, it's again, it really depends on the context where we're working. So I think a good understanding of what are the needs, the priority needs in that context is the first step that needs to be taken. So like a kind of rapid or full assessment of what are the key challenge opportunities that children face in that area. I think that the key priorities are creating more space for not only for children, but for communities to meet and move around. So reduce as much as possible traffic, open streets for children, create more a network that communicates spaces where children can go and meet and play. And then focus on bringing nature back to cities so that in addition to creating healthier environment for children and the community where they live there, there is also like the benefit of addressing climate risk, and so increase the resilience of the city. And then I think is important really to tailor solutions based on the specific needs on the context that where you want to work. And then piloting, also Nikita says, is important because sometimes there might be some pushback from the community because people sometimes don't like change. And so I think it's good to try maybe, if it's a new concept in your community, start for something small that you can remove, that is temporary, like starting from closing roads for like a Sunday of play or in play streets, and so that people can understand the benefit of it, can see, and then can ask for it. That can be also a way for starting small and then having a longer impact.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Sara. Thank you, Wendy. And it now gives me great pleasure to introduce our final speaker for the morning, James Delaney. And James is the founder and managing director of Blockworks, a global design studio that has pioneered the use of Minecraft as a design tool. And I will confess, I am not a gamer other than maybe a little Tetris. So this will be an illuminating presentation for me, but through his role at Blockworks and as a board member of Block by Block, which is an organization that works with communities to transform and maintain public spaces, he's participated in design projects that use Minecraft as an engagement tool for diverse projects around the world. So James, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and thanks to all the previous speakers. It's really fascinating talks so far, and hopefully something that I can add to. Okay, share my screen. Great. Hopefully you can see my screen now.
All good. Thank you.
All good, great. Yes, so I'm chair of the Block by Block Foundation, which is a US-based nonprofit that works worldwide. And in a nutshell, we use the video game Minecraft as a participatory design tool for public spaces as well as other spaces, but predominantly public space. So yeah, our goal really is to improve the lives of city dwellers and all sections of communities living in those cities by improving their urban neighborhoods. Predominantly, we work in the Global South. However, we've, over the sort of 9-10 years we've existed, developed a methodology that has been used in other contexts as well. And we've done quite a few projects more recently in Europe and North America, which, yeah, as I said, are using Minecraft as a participatory design tool. Okay, yeah, so for us, Minecraft really, when we're using Minecraft, we're not using it as a video game as such, but more as a design tool. Minecraft's about 11 years old now, and it's really become this kind of cultural phenomenon that's as widely recognized as it is in Houston as it is in Hanoi and Vietnam, where we've done quite a lot of work. So it's a very widely known video game. It's the world's most popular computer game in history, but it's also very easy to use. And we found that it's a very powerful form of communication. A little bit about our foundation. We're quite an interesting group of people, but the foundation is really formed of three major partners. Mojang, which is the Swedish game developer who created Minecraft about 11 years ago. Microsoft, which is the corporate parent of Mojang. They bought Minecraft and Mojang Studios in about 2015. And UN Habitat, who are our implementing partners, and through their sort of vast network of UN offices, are able to go in on the ground and deliver the workshops and processes that we direct them to. And between all three, we've got quite an interesting mix of skills in technology, in gaming, as well as urban planning and design. So I probably don't need to spend too long on this, but obviously public space is a hugely important factor in the design of cities. I think for us, really, public space is a lens through which we can address a very wide range of issues, ranging from sustainability to social inclusion to democracy, empowerment. You know, public spaces are really the nexus of which so many social, economic, political issues sort of coexist in the city. And increasingly more of the world is living in cities, and as that happens, the importance for good public space only becomes more important. We're also really passionate about youth engagement, and as you've already heard from the other speakers, the importance of that is absolutely huge. The amount of city dwellers who are under 18 is going up significantly, and by 2030, the UN estimates it will be 60% of all city dwellers will be sort of kids and young people. And for us, there's a certain irony in the thought that the cities of tomorrow will be inhabited by today's youth, but it's precisely them who are so often left out of design decisions and community consultations. So for us, Minecraft and the block by block methodology is a way to address this imbalance and really give young people a voice in how their cities are designed. I think Adam made an interesting point about screen time, and I think something that's important to us is that the process we use isn't entirely detached from the real space that we're addressing. Having said that, we have found that technology in Minecraft in particular can be a real catalyst for change and really kind of level the playing field in terms of who can participate and engage with planning processes. We also believe in an approach that everyone can join in, and I think UN's Global Public Space team have found that more traditional participatory approaches, which might be sort of drawing maps or 2D plans, are quite complicated and not everyone can understand them. But a more simple approach that is also kind of very three-dimensional and tactile and immersive might be more effective. And then finally, we believe a lot in cumulative impact. So although the projects we do are individual public spaces, we're really cognizant of the ability for those spaces to build up momentum and actually sort of enact change on a wider sort of local, regional, national level, looking at things like public space policy. And we found in many of our projects, one project is really just the starting point for a whole range of other public spaces to be improved. So I'll talk a little bit about our methodology exactly and how it works. The first thing that we would do is identify the public space in question. Sometimes it's a public space which needs a bit of love or care or attention. Sometimes it is simply a neglected space which hasn't been used for anything for various reasons. And our first step really is to recreate that physical space inside Minecraft. So we build a 3D virtual model inside the computer game Minecraft. The second thing we do is to mobilize the community and identify who will be participating in our workshops. Typically, we try and make sure we have as broad a representation of the community as possible, paying particular attention to disadvantaged or unheard groups. Sometimes, however, we do run workshops which have a specific stakeholder in mind, and I'll go into some examples later on, but that could be working with refugee groups, it could be working with women and girls, disabled residents. But typically we try and obviously include as much of the community as possible. Thirdly, we'll organize the workshops themselves, which are normally about 3 days with 30 participants. And we will kind of divide those participants up so that every 2 to 4 participants have access to one machine, one computer with Minecraft on it. Then UN Habitat will deliver a crash course in public space planning, the basics and general design considerations of public space, and also begin an open sort of dialogue and debate about that space and the needs of the community. The next step, which is super important, is really a site visit so that everyone, hopefully they're already familiar with the site because they're local residents, but making sure that they walk through the space and really understand the area and its context. Then we get into Minecraft. So teaching participants Minecraft is always the fun part. Interestingly, it normally only takes about half an hour to 2 hours on the top end before someone is completely proficient in Minecraft. It's interesting as well, since we mostly work in the Global South in areas which have very low digital literacy rates, we're not just teaching them to use Minecraft, we're actually teaching them digital skills from scratch. And you find even in those cases where someone has no experience with computers, they can still pick up Minecraft and do what they need to do in the case of a few hours. In a lot of cases in the global north where we've worked, this actually is instant. A lot of kids and even adults know exactly what they're doing already, and no teaching needs to take place. It does also create quite an interesting power dynamic where often the kids who are kind of either excluded or their voice isn't particularly well heard, they find themselves as the experts in the room. And that's quite an interesting way of developing a more kind of intergenerational approach to planning, where the adults will then be looking towards the kids and relying on them for advice and sort of tips on how to use Minecraft. So that's quite an interesting dynamic as well. The whole community group is then split up into smaller teams. And for the bulk of the workshop, usually sort of 2 days, 1.5 days, those teams will design in Minecraft the public space that they want to see for their city. So building on the model that we've already created, which is kind of like a template, they will add in their own design ideas and considerations. Then each team will present the Minecraft model that they've made. They'll talk about the ideas that they had. And it's really important for us that actually local stakeholders are present, as well as professionals, urban planners, architects. So it's not just a community group presenting to each other, but the key decision makers are there and available for that session. Finally, we will create this kind of this matrix, I guess, which looks at all the different design elements that the different groups have made and seeing which features are most frequently reoccurring. So this will easily help us identify what the key priorities are for a community. We then take that Minecraft model that kind of identifies those community priorities, and working with sort of local designers and architects, transform that into a workable architectural plan. And then the foundation will actually fund the construction of that public space according to the plan. So although our focus really is on the participatory approach and Minecraft's role in that, as a foundation, we only work on projects where we actually have a deliverable outcome. And so for us, it's particularly important in the Global South that we do not run any sort of community engagement or participatory approach which gets people's hopes up but isn't then deliverable. So at the start of the project, we do a lot of kind of assessments, making sure the budget's there, making sure we have the necessary permissions to make sure that whatever the community comes up with, that design can be realized and built. And then the final step of our process is really at the advocacy level. So advocating for a continued investment in public space transformation. We've recently been working on our first country program, which is by sort of running several block by block workshops in a number of cities in Ethiopia. We're starting to actually change the whole sort of national policy on public space and how public participation is managed. So we've been going for about 10 years. Over that time, we've worked in nearly 50 countries. We've built about 135 public spaces, and now more than 2.3 million people actually live within a 15-minute walk of a public space that was made in Minecraft, which is quite impressive. We've had 30,000 people participate in our workshops, almost half of which are women and girls, which is super important of us. And we've also produced a number of kind of reports, toolkits, trainings, and other outputs. But these are really our key stats. So I'll talk a little bit as well about some of the examples of types of projects we've done, and some of the core themes that we try to address with our participatory approaches. So I think one of the interesting things we've noticed is Minecraft's potential to resolve a lot of community tension and conflict. And we've actually worked in some of the most, I would say, challenging urban environments that there are. We've done projects in the Gaza Strip, we've done projects in Kosovo. We're doing a project this year in Myanmar, which is in a state of civil war, Ethiopia as well, which is has a very difficult political situation. And we find that when used in the right way, Minecraft is really a chance to bring people together from different viewpoints, different backgrounds, and help them to collaborate in a way that is productive and dissolves a lot of the possible tension and flashpoints that those communities have. It could be around religion, it could be around sort of cultural backgrounds, but particularly in the projects we've done in Gaza and Kosovo, we've seen a remarkable difference actually in how different community groups talk to each other and sort of respond to each other by using this tool. Secondly, I think accessibility is incredibly important, and with Minecraft comes the potential to really use a common language, particularly for deaf and hard of hearing people. We did a project in the UAE, which for them, this was the first time that they could actually kind of express their viewpoints without feeling like they were sort of at a disadvantage. And I think that's something quite nice about Minecraft, is that it kind of levels the playing field, and no matter your sort of disabilities or even your sort of educational training, everyone has the same opportunity to convey their ideas and viewpoints through creating these 3D models. Thirdly, and I've talked a little bit about this already, but increasing digital and literacy skills. something that's important to us is that during the workshops, there are actual kind of skills and teachings that people can take forward and use after them. I think we did a project in Kenya where, as part of the design workshop, we looked at sort of sustainable energy sources, and we had an extra day of the workshop which involved participants designing and sort of building their own solar panels, which we used to power the public space. And Minecraft's quite effective at being able to plug into lots of sort of other educational approaches. Minecraft has a sort of global education initiative as well, where you can sort of accompany the game with lesson plans and other sorts of things. So it's quite good to plug into other sort of learning initiatives. And then finally, I think giving people a sense of ownership over the space that they've created. You know, if a community has had a real say and a hand in how that space was designed, they're so much more likely to take an interest in how it's maintained, how it's looked after. And that's incredibly important for us, that we're not just going in, delivering a public space and leaving, but we're actually enabling the community to support that space in the long term. And the design is just the very first kind of stage of that, but you need to really consider how the space is going to be maintained, what it's going to look like in 5-10 years, how it might adapt due to kind of, you know, different demographic shifts or changes in climate and so on. So having that long-term view of the public space is really important. And we've seen time and time again that participants in our workshops become kind of local leaders and caretakers in the space that they've created, which is really important for us. Finally, I wanted to introduce you to a new toolkit that we've launched quite recently, the Book by Book Playbook, which makes our sort of participatory methodology available for anyone to download and use themselves. And you can scan that QR code to do that, or I think there'll be a link provided as well, which I can put in the chat. And this is just one sort of page of it, but it breaks down in absolute detail all the different stages and phases that we go through. So looking at planning first, then the Minecraft workshop, then the implementation. It gives advice on how you might be able to use Minecraft, how you can you know, select the community group to work on the project. And yeah, this was really predominantly the output of UN Habitat, but we're starting to see it be adopted by other sort of planning groups, which is really interesting as well. There's a great initiative called Her City, which is also one of UN Habitat's projects, which looks at women and girls in planning specifically. But really the toolkit is there for anyone to use and kind of adapt and have fun with. Yeah, that's the end of my presentation, but happy to take any questions or otherwise move on to the Q&A with the rest of the panel.
Great. Wendy, do we have any questions for James?
Not at the moment.
All right. Well, we'll have a chance to give you a chance to think of any in a minute at the panel. So again, I'm Jeff Table, Director of Community and Environmental Planning at the Houston-Galveston Area Council, and I'm sorry I was unable to share my welcoming remarks due to technical difficulties at my apartment today, but I thought they might actually be just as good for a lead-in to the panel discussion. And the main thing I wanted to stress is why making our communities kid-friendly is important. You know, I think all of us who have children, or in my case now grandchildren, want them to be able to live in safe, healthy places that enrich their minds and bodies. But the things that make a community kid-friendly will also enhance the quality of life for all of its residents, make it more sustainable, and I would submit more economically viable in the long term. But we are swimming against some strong tides. In our region, and I'm guessing in many places around the US and the world, we've been undergoing a big sort, if you will, with the concentration of families and kids living at home increasing in suburban areas and either remaining flat or declining in our urban and rural areas. And for those of you outside of the HGAC region, this is a map of our 13 county service area. and in the center is Harris County, where Houston sits. This is looking at the concentrations of children under 18 as per the 2020 census in a 1 mile grid. So hopefully you can see my cursor. You see that is central Houston, and we have greater concentrations of kids in this sort of band of suburban and fast-growing communities on our outskirts. And then once again, as we get into our more rural counties at the edge of the region, we have rather low concentrations of child populations. Next slide, please, Andrea. So this is looking at the change in child population from the 2010 census to the 2020 census. And I think that puts this trend in a little bit starker relief. So you see the places in red are where we've had the greatest growth. The places in blue are where we've had decline, and then the green are the areas that are flat. So once again, we're seeing the sorry, technical difficulties persist. We're seeing a emptying out, in fact, of a lot of parts of the central city in terms of concentrations of kids, and then the fastest growth occurring in these outlying suburban areas. And the reason for this is not surprising. It's factors such as school quality or perceptions of school quality. It's the range of housing choices available, and perhaps somewhat unique to the Houston area, a lot of the growth that you see in those red zones is being absorbed by master plan communities, where we have very large tracts of land that can be undertaken in a comprehensive design and have a lot of the features and connectivity that have been talked about in earlier panels. While this is a strong trend, it is not destiny. And one thing I hope you've learned from all of our speakers today is that some of the solutions that are available are not expensive. They don't have huge gestation periods like infrastructure projects, and they can be implemented in places without many resources at all to speak of. The other thing I hope you've learned is that there is a lot of help out there in terms of tools, resources, and organizations that can assist you with this effort. I think the time is now. There's a great opportunity for communities throughout our region to look at making themselves more kid-friendly. And the timing is, we are just entering the large echo boom. So, you know, the boomers were the big generation. We had our kids, the millennials, and now the millennials are getting into that family formation stage. So we're going to see another boom of children in our region. It's still up for grabs as to where they will locate. The other thing, I think we don't know fully how that's going to play out, but with the advent of Zoom and ability to work remote, I think people are going to be going forward a bit less tethered to access to traditional job centers. So if that's not an issue, then quality of life really becomes much more of a determining factor when people choose where to locate, and particularly where families choose to locate. I would say, you know, if you don't have the school system rating that you'd like, if you don't have the housing stock you'd like, you can still work on a lot of the enhancements that have been described today. I am a subscriber to the old movie cliche that if you build it, they will come. So if your community begins to get that brand as a child-friendly community, even though you may not have some of these other assets, that can only build and set you apart from others in the region and the state and the nation. So with that, I will kick it to the panel. And I'm sorry, Nikita had to jump off, but we still have Adam, Sara, and James. So the thing I always like to ask at these workshops is, so when everybody goes, they're always on Friday, by the way, when everybody goes back to work on Monday, and you haven't really thought about this and don't know where to start, where's the place to start? I'll go in reverse order with James. Let's say you wanted to set up exercise either with block by block or maybe something a little bit less formal, but some of these same concepts. Where would you start on Monday to begin getting ready for doing some of this amazing engagement of young people and other stakeholders in designing better spaces?
Sure. So from our point of view, I think the toolkit that I shared is a great place to start. We, in the last year, due to COVID, the last 2 years really, we haven't been able to do as many physical workshops as we'd have liked. So that's kind of forced us to make an interesting innovation of delivering workshops remotely. Quite difficult in the global south where there's a huge digital divide and not reliable connection, but it has worked well in the global north. There are risks of doing things entirely digitally, which I've kind of touched on, but at least from a point of view of familiarizing yourselves as planners or local government with Minecraft, we've been able to deliver training of trainer sessions to a number of local governments. And I think the second avenue to explore are the kids themselves. They, you know, I would imagine in most sort of states in the US, you've got a whole army of young kids who are Minecraft fanatics and would actually love to take a lead on this. And we've actually seen several workshops come about, not through us, not through local governments, but entirely instigated by the kids themselves who've seen similar projects and kind of brought this forward to the adults to make it happen. So again, it's a bit of a leap of faith to kind of put your trust in the untrained, but when it comes to designing kid-friendly spaces, they're the ones who know what they want. So that's worth considering.
Excellent, excellent. What do you think, Sara? Where would you start on Monday if you hadn't really thought about this issue much and wanted to get a plan together to go forward?
Yeah, of course, depending on what's the background of the person that I am on Monday. But assuming that I'm someone working within a city authority or actually a city maker, depending on, and I never thought about child-friendly city, I think spend some time to look at existing guidelines, to look at existing case studies, to first of all make kind of a shift in like a mental shift, say, understand that it's not rocket science. As you said, Jeff, there are so many great solutions that have been implemented over the years. And COVID, one of the good things about COVID is actually that it kind of it has been like an awakening for in terms of city design and planning, because many acupuncture interventions have been implemented, or placemaking interventions have been implemented over the past months to kind of recreate a space that is more livable. So there are so many great ideas out there, and they're not so expensive. So to look at that, to be inspired, to understand that child-friendly city is not, it doesn't have to be approached as a silo or a sector, but the design of child-friendly cities needs to be embedded in the way we normally design cities. So another suggestion is to take a walk with a child, can be son, friend, or nephew, or but just walk around the child and ask, what do you think? Really ask the child, what do you think? How do you make it? How would you make it more playful? How would you make it more interesting from your point of view? To really start to or rethink, try to have some memory when this person was a kid, what liked to do or not. And so really to try to look at the city space using a more different lens. So that's like, because I think it's important to understand that it's not rocket science. It is possible, it's viable, it's not so expensive.
Thank you. Well, how about you, Adam? If we want to get some of those cool spaces up and running in our communities, where do we start on Monday?
Yeah, I'm not sure in this scenario if I have unlimited cash or not, but
let's say limited cash for now.
Okay,
but,
good.
Just to plan to build some momentum
So the first things, I think the first steps are to go to where the kids are. And so wherever there are kids there are gatekeepers. And there are grown-ups, and I don't mind saying that we have a saying on the main beam that holds up our office, and it says "grown-ups suck," and on it, and it's because so much of what we do as gatekeepers is for the sake of our own concern, get in the way of those kids just being able to play. I would go to the schools, I would find the churches, the scouts groups, and I'd go to the BIAs, and I'd go to the school boards as well. And I would force those gatekeepers to stand aside while we dumped dirt and mulch and sticks and rocks and gave them the things that they could play with. And I would hold back the parents and the gatekeepers for long enough to witness the kids play. And there is nothing more convincing for a gatekeeper than watching kids actually collaboratively play full sensory, mucky, moving stuff, making stuff, touching stuff. That will change the way you look at those kids. You'll remember what it was like, but you need to stand back for 10 minutes. So I guess I would be the arms that would hold them back while the loads of stuff landed. And then we would let them actually participate. It does not have to be expensive stuff. It can be the tailings from your local arborist, and that stuff would be enough to engage a whole community. And if we can hold back the gatekeepers, the number's actually 12 minutes, by the way. It takes 12 minutes for those kids to settle in for long enough that there's no more frenetic pinballing of the kids everywhere. They're focused, they're smart, they're adept. And that moment at 12 minutes is when the parents look at it differently and are willing to consider this for them.
Excellent. Well, I'll ask Wendy, do we have some questions from the audience for the panel?
Yes, there was a question that says, do you notice any differences in design preferences between children and adults? That was for James, but I think the panel as a whole can answer it as well.
Well, let's start with James, and then we'll let Sara and Adam weigh in.
Sure, the answer is yes, definitely, a lot of the time. And I think it's a shame, but as adults, we're slightly conditioned to be less playful, less creative, maybe, in many respects. And that's one of the things that we like about using Minecraft, is even if you're an adult, it kind of brings you back to a space of play. One of the great things about video games and play spaces is you can take risks. There's no right or wrong. You're not going to be told off for not getting it right. And so something we see, the kids are all automatically in it. They're in what we call the state of flow, which kind of like, as Adam said, they're just completely dedicated and focused to the task. But after a while, adults can get back there. They're almost kind of brought back to their childhoods as they're in this kind of amazing video game world where they can build what they like. So yes, initially, but over time, we see those kind of two approaches to design sort of converge a little bit. Yeah, but be interested to hear about the others' experiences.
What do you think, Sara?
Yeah, I agree with James. I mean, kids they don't have barriers in relation to the creativity. I thought they are kind of common ask, like unicorns. They love unicorns, or dragons, or swimming pools. That's something that they really like to have. But definitely is it's quite amazing the way they, like when we run this workshop using the Lego bricks in Cape Town, in the informal settlement for the kids. It was the first time that they play with the bricks. So we were a bit worried because you say, okay, we don't know how they can react if they understand. And I don't know, but it was kind of immediate. The moment we throw the bricks on the table, instantly, something on the DNA, I don't know, but they just started to build. And the build, it was amazing what they managed to create in a short period of time. Also, the way they managed to communicate the challenges. For instance, there was this little kid that she built this playground with all the fence around and 2 policemen there inside the playground, because I mean in the township the huge problem with safety, security. And so she was 5 years old and she managed so well to create and to to transmit her, the challenges that she was facing. So that was quite impressive. And adults, we unfortunately, we forget how to play, and we forget that play is not something that is only for kids. So we should all be more playful and be more creative. And so it's an exercise. So I think it's nice also, I'm a big fan of Minecraft. And I think it's great the fact that you create using a playful approach, so that you really help also grown-ups to go back to their childhood, to become more happy and playful and a bit silly as well. And I think it's nice, this approach.
Adam, what do you think?
It's interesting. It's we do a lot of our work in areas that I guess have not been gentrified. I was just looking at some of the chat stuff. The common thread that seems to happen in these consultations is that if we make it sensory and playful, and we don't make it prescriptive, and we really are opening up a conversation between them, and we're genuinely interested in why it is that they like the things that they like, not just what it is, but why they like that, we can get to a core understanding between both the adult and the kid, because the whys line up. It turns out that no matter where you are, if 5 kids say they want a tube slide, for example, actually, if you ask them why, they say because they can disappear. Not because of the sliding, but more often they say because they can disappear. It's interesting if you can collect up those whys. And that conversation around why that's important translates really well to parents and their experience. And we get to have a conversation with them. And I'm just remembering a story when we were in the Calumet River, and it was on the day in Chicago where they set the new record for shootings, and it was that neighborhood that had them. And you could hear it in the background while we were doing a consultation. The playfulness, the playful engagement around the conversation, that idea of using play as the tool to get to the bottom of it, unifies both the adult and the kid in the conversation. If you don't have play involved in the consultation, then you end up having a very separate, very different answer from the parent and the kid. It's hard to get that unified response.
Excellent, thanks. I see a question here for all of what sort of staffing requirements are necessary for an organization to partner with you all or other groups. And I might expand that a little bit. Sometimes it may not be an entity that really has a staff. It's a community organization. So what kind of partners? I know we're holding the gatekeepers back for a while, but what partners then need to be in place to move forward with implementation? Anyone who would answer yet?
Yeah, I'll go. That's the tough one. I think so much of it depends on context and what local kind of planning and regulatory structures are in place. Interestingly, in a lot of the Global South areas that we work at, there's very little to no red tape. And interestingly, it's actually easier to deliver a public space in a slum in Nairobi than it is in London or Seattle or wherever. Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, an interesting option is kind of more tactical urbanism, and this is something we've been trying a little bit, are really small scale interventions, which don't require sort of wholesale buy-in from local government, but some small changes and interventions which are within kind of permitted planning laws can have a huge impact. And that's sort of quite an interesting way of approaching it. I might have gone off topic a little bit, but I'll let the other two speak.
Maybe from our side, like the way we work with the design guide, the proximity of care design guide, we work with local organization with kind of urban planning background expertise. So with people who are able to understand space dimensions and systems, and also with the capacity to undertake like assessment or collect information, because understanding the context and the beneficiaries' needs is quite important. Then, of course, there is a need of a local support from the communities where you're working, not only to identify the areas, to understand the context, but also to ensure that whatever you design and implement and build, then there is a community there that will make sure that the intervention is properly maintained and in the long term, and used properly in the long term. And that, of course, then depends again in the context, but then of course the support of the city authority, because they need to give all the permits for design, construction, and then they should be also responsible for the maintenance of the interventions. And of course, the funder of the intervention, who is gonna, if this is the city authority or external donor willing, or foundation willing to support the construction, the design of these interventions. So is a multidisciplinary kind of approach, and also of different stakeholders are needed to make this happen.
Adam?
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, every project from the community side needs a champion, someone who is willing to be passionate and see it through, and is so determined that they're willing to sort of push through whatever the regulatory process and the silos that occur in each of our communities, each of our political and regulatory processes. So there needs to be that person, and then a willingness to actually have the people who might say no. I'm a fan of having all the people who might say no in the room early. Let's have the conversation. Let's address the concerns. Let's get through that piece on behalf of that passionate community advocate, so that we can see where the agreements are quickly, and then move forward with some sort of plan to get either some or all of it. The money has to be there at some point for sure, but we have a lot of projects that have been successful that have just started with the passion, and then the support for that passionate advocate. Then sometimes that takes a year, and sometimes it takes a month. Without the money, it takes a little longer, but I've seen a lot of successful projects that really just had an advocate and no cash at the beginning.
Excellent. Have a couple more questions, so I'll ask us to go rapid fire to keep us on schedule here. But we had a comment really that a lot of the things shown in my presentation are the results of gentrification or other policies that have exacerbated structural inequities. Is there a risk in doing this kind of work, particularly in historically underserved communities that might be a little bit sensitive to shifts such as gentrification? Is there a risk that we're perpetuating that, or can these techniques really be used to alter that structure in positive ways? Whoever would like to respond to that. Yes, Adam.
I mean, I'll hop in. I think that there's always a risk. The work that we do has to be done with people, not for people. There's a perception that doing something, specifically for them, can actually be perceived as being done to them, and that's where these things get, more difficult. So there has to be organizations that are already tapped into communities that are doing really good work, and there are in every community, regardless of gentrification or not, or equity or inequity. And it's finding those organizations that you can partner with, that you can team with, that have a built-up trust that you can support to be able to deliver this program. I've found that to be a lot more successful and genuine. So that's the first piece. And the second piece is our job is to listen. Our job for the first half of this is to listen as hard as we can to what they're really saying that they need, and then seeing whether or not we're the right resource for them to get there. And we might not be. I mean, I might be calling Sara for one and go, I'm a bad fit, but what you're doing right now would fit perfectly for them. The idea is, who do you know that can support that community? And there isn't a one size fits all for each one of this. And sometimes it isn't me. I fully admit that, but you need to listen to really figure that out first, to those organizations that are already in the driver's seat there.
Great. Any comments to that, James or Sara?
I think, yeah, what Adam said is right. And I think that to reduce the risk, if we can call it a risk of gentrification, I think, I mean, there are different elements that you need to consider. It's not like one solution, but I think inclusion is important in the way you design the intervention. So including the beneficiaries of the intervention and to have them actively engage. So to become not beneficiaries, but active designers of the intervention, and to make sure that, of course, then there is like a legal framework that reduce the risk of gentrification that also that comes from the local authorities to private investors. So of course it can happen. I'm open on that. There is the risk that gentrification can happen, but I think it's not because you create a playful area that as a consequence you have gentrification. It's, again, the way you approach, because if it's embedded in the way you design all the city, all public space, so I don't think there is a risk for gentrification, because there are other dynamics that are related to have a gentrification as a result of an intervention in the urban space. So it's not just creating child-friendly cities that create that. But again, I think inclusion, if I can use one word, is quite important in the entire process, from the way the idea to the implementation.
Great. James?
Yeah, just very quickly, I think a bottom-up rather than a top-down approach that's predominantly led by grassroots organizations is less likely to see the risk of gentrification.
Great.
Keep it at that.
Well, the last question I see is probably a too big one to unpack in a long answer, but I'll ask if any of you want to take a rapid fire 5-word or less answer. Culture versus design. So, is it the culture that creates the will and the infrastructure, if you borrow another term, to get the design done? Or is it more of a, if you build it, they will come, if you build it, you can establish that culture? So which side of that equation do you all fall on?
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful question, first of all. And I think that a culture has always influenced design. If you look, I live in Mozambique for many years, in Maputo, and the way the historic center was designed by Portuguese architects, you can see that it was influenced by the local culture. And culture is not something that is still in time, it's permanent, it changes. So the kind of catch-22, the way you design influence culture, and then culture influence design. And then it's very difficult that there is, especially now with globalization, there is not only one culture in a city. There are different cultures. And so that's why, again, engaging different people, understanding what they want is extremely important, because then you design something that is unique for that context. And also, so projects that is a way for integrating different cultures, like public space, like the work, for instance, catalytic action, the great designers, they work a lot, refugee kids in Lebanon. And the way they design the spaces really help integrating different cultures from refugees living in the cities. So culture is always changing and moving as design.
Great. Any final thoughts on that, Adam or James?
And I'll jump in. I mean, I think that great design is a reflection of the cultural, industrial, and natural heritage that surrounds it, and that there is stuff that predates us. We are temporary custodians of this planet, and it, as Sara said, it is a culture is a transient thing. It constantly shifts and changes. I mean, 15 years ago, we wouldn't have a conversation about how to design with Minecraft. And yet it is a part of the culture of children now, and we have to be considering that. So I see, if you've done it well, it's a reflection of those three different systems: the industrial heritage, the cultural heritage, and the natural heritage, all reflected back in these spaces. Only through the consultation with the community can you sort of get there. So it has to come from them. For me, I'm more firmly on the coming from them than coming. I'm more of a design facilitator than a designer.
James, we'll give you the last word on this.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I'd say it's a pretty reciprocal relationship. I think, as Sara and Alan have said, obviously design is a product of our culture, but over time, design can engender certain social behaviors which might translate to a shift in culture. But we don't really have the time to dissect that. But I don't think you can draw a clear division between the two there. Symbiotic in some sense.
Well, thank you all for a great morning and wonderful resources. Again, all of your presentations are available or will be available on our website. And we also asked, Andrea just sent out a brief survey. We'd really like to hear what you think. We take the input very seriously, and we want to design a good fall planning workshop for next year. But it's been my great pleasure to visit with you all this morning. And Andrea, any closing housekeeping before we adjourn the meeting?
No, again, I want to echo the thank you everybody for coming, and we will send an email out to everyone who registered and certainly everyone who attended with the links to where the presentations are and a copy of all the links that all of our presenters shared today, because we have a lot of valuable information to click on and learn more. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, well, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and let's all get going on Monday. We are adjourned.